in some respects, I go back and forth when teaching world religions as to whether to include atheism or not. Frequently, I've had students, as I've taught it over the years, ask to talk about it. And in other cases, I think a case can be made to not talk about it. But I think that there are also good reasons, and I think Prothero does present some of those reasons in his conclusion to why atheism should be included in a discussion of religions. But we'll get to that in a little bit as to whether or not it belongs, and obviously kind of next question with it, whether or not atheism should be considered religious or not. I want to make sure we have some terms down, clarify some things, make sure that we're clear on those terms, as well as begin to make some distinctions. So the first term, of course, is the term we're looking at, atheism. Atheism refers to the rejection of the existence of a god or gods. Not only is it a rejection of those specific beings, there's also rejection of supernaturalism in toto. That essentially the atheist position is that the material world is all that exists. So anything beyond the physical doesn't exist. So there's no notion of souls or spirits or anything like that. Anything that exists is a product of physical objects and physical processes, which would include rejecting any sort of concrete, distinct idea of what we might call mind. That the mind, that kind of voice in your head, so to speak, the part that you consider to be really you, the part when you're thinking that is active, that would be simply the product of physical structures, the brain. And that somehow it has to be explained by how the brain operates. There is no interiority or non-physical reality that would be responsible for what we call the mind. That's in distinction to another term, agnosticism. And so agnosticism kind of sits between theism or supernaturalism and atheism. For the agnostic, the belief is that there is not enough evidence either way to make a firm conclusion. And so the agnostic doesn't necessarily believe or disbelieve, they're not sure, but essentially you can't know. Hence the term agnostic. Agnostic, the Greek word for knowledge, you put an alpha or an A in front of it, that negates it, so you can't know. Most agnostics, however, have a rather complicated view of supernaturalism. There are some that would lean towards atheism, while other agnostics would believe in some sort of spiritual reality. So there's kind of a spectrum even within agnosticism. But our focus is specifically on the atheistic look. Prothero makes a distinction, or notes how many people will make a distinction between what he terms strong atheism versus weak atheism. Essentially, the idea is that the strong atheist is someone that actively denies God. Somebody that is firmly committed to the belief that there is no God, and would be often active in promoting that belief. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. The weak atheist, essentially, the idea behind weak atheism is the notion that it is not such an important part of their identity. There's more to who they are than being atheistic. Whereas the strong atheist would be one who would be trying to convince others that God does not exist. Prothero prefers that instead of those terms, making a distinction between angry atheists and friendly atheists. Now, the reason he's making this term is because of how closely tied atheism is to politics in the contemporary period. as most religion is as well. The idea here is that there are those individuals who are not only actively opposing religion, they are very upset about the role of religion in society and are trying very actively to discredit it. On the other hand, the friendly atheist, in Prothero's distinction, are simply people looking for atheism to be respected, to be not looking for it to be something that is looked down upon or discredited. The friendly atheist is not looking to destroy religion, would be, while they believe that religion, and specifically the notion of God, is false, if somebody wants to believe that, they can go ahead and believe that, right? Versus the angry atheist, who is really trying to make sure that religion is removed as much as possible from the public sphere. Here again, I don't know that these are the best distinctions, but what it does try to help us understand is that there are a variety of atheists, there are a variety of atheisms. And so often the distinction can be made along those lines of how active are they in opposing religion. Much like we would see in if we would look at other traditions or other systems of thought and say, well, some people are more committed to actively proselytizing or evangelizing. Others are simply more reserved. Like everything else, atheism has a history. It is not just a modern phenomenon. We can be tempted to believe the idea that atheism has only arisen because of modern scientific developments, some of which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But that's not exactly true. Certainly modern expressions of atheism are shaped a lot by the contemporary period, come up because of the contemporary situation with science, but there has been atheism in human history even prior to this point. Some of the ancient Greek philosophers, for example, did something similar to what modern-day atheists do, and turned away from the supernatural and looked instead to naturalistic approaches to explain reality. Promoting an ideology very similar to what we find in modern-day atheism, that nature understood through the reason is the best way to understand reality, that nature operates according to laws, that it's self-contained, that there's nothing outside of it. Even some of the great philosophers would have been referred to as atheists in ancient Greece, primarily because they denied the existence of the Greek and Roman gods. However, the terminology of the time is a lot more amorphous in ancient Greece and ancient Rome than what we use it today. For example, Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries were referred to as atheists because they did not believe in the Greek and Roman gods. Yet, of course, they are believing in God. Right? And so they wouldn't have technically been atheists, how we use the term, but it was a term that was used for those that didn't believe in gods of Greece and Rome as well. Another expression of what we might term atheism we can see in some of the religions in India. We've pointed out a couple of different places of how some religions are essentially atheistic. Usually, though, in those atheistic religions, there's not a complete abandonment of the supernatural. That instead, there are these conceptions of forces or energies or powers that inhabit the universe, even though there might not be beings that we would refer to as God. And so we can find within the religions of India this rejection of the need for deities to explain realities or the goals of life. Rejection in the need of deities to help a person achieve meaning or release. However, it's very important to recognize that the 18th century brought a different change to modern day. atheism. Unlike the religions of India, and even, we might say, some aspects of ancient Greek atheism, the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on rationality, and rationality being the best way to understand nature and human beings, the optimism that attended that was the powers that the human reason has. Right? That our brains and our minds are so powerful that we can understand reality. And so that optimism in how we're able to understand the world factored into all this, as well as the Enlightenment belief in progress. And that we are more enlightened in the present than we were in the past. It was during the Enlightenment, of course, that we have a major development in the rise of science. Science, of course, had been developing modern science had been developing for a couple of centuries at the time. But it's really in the Enlightenment that science begins to take a prominent place as a way to explain reality. As a full-blown expression of all this, we can probably point to the cult of reason as an outgrowth of the Enlightenment that attempted to systematize atheism. The cult of reason was a civic response of the French Revolution. When the French decided to throw off the monarchy, not only did they reject certain forms of government, many of those that were active in the revolution were also anti-Catholic. Catholicism, the state religion in France, but removed with the monarchy as well. But the leaders of the French Revolution recognized that there needed to be some sort of civic organization that would keep people tied together to follow a new government, or otherwise there would be anarchy. And so they developed the cult of reason. Essentially, the cult of reason was a social organization that produced the functions of religion without the supernatural. Right? And so you're creating a system of communal bonds, right? People being tied together. You're also developing a system of rituals. People were expected to sacrifice at the altar of freedom. But again, you don't have the so-called superstitious aspects of religion. Deities, the supernatural, the notion of revelation, any of those kind of things. Unfortunately, many people did face persecution, imprisonment, or death because they would not swear before the altar of freedom, and so the persecution turned around. Now, I'm not saying that all atheism, all atheists, all atheistic systems are like this, right? That if atheism wins the day, there's going to be persecution. But what we're seeing in the cult of reason is an attempt to try and make atheism a system that would order a culture, a society. Into the 19th century, kind of developing out of this, there are a variety of social philosophers, other thinkers who advanced the notion of atheism based out of the Enlightenment and other developments related to science. People like Nietzsche, Freud, Marx, and these are the kind of individuals that we were talking about. And really what you see here is a more explicit statement of religion being damaging to society. In the 18th century, even in the cult of reason, there's a recognition that there are some things about religion that are positive to society, even if you're an atheist. And so the recognition of communal bonds. Right? For societies to succeed, people have to be bonded together. They have to have some sort of commitment to each other. Morality. And so a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers that are changing their ideas about God also felt that religion was vitally important for morality. But what you have with this late 19th century development is kind of a reversal of that, where religion had served positive purposes, even though it was, in their minds, superstition. The goal of people like Freud especially, and Marx, was that religion served to oppress people, either economically or, in the case of Freud, psychologically. And so hopefully it would be something that would eventually disappear. Freud, for example, compared religion to a childhood neurosis, right? Something that people develop in childhood that really is not based on reality. And so he felt that religion was people regressing psychologically into their childhood and hoped that society would overcome it.